Hey, this is Jay, and this is a quick tutorial for automatically repurposing your newsletter content into social media posts using n8n and ChatGPT. So this is a quick preview of what we are going to build. I've already built it, but I will be building it from scratch. In this example, I'm actually using an RSS feed to get my newsletter posts. Then I pull the content out and modify that with GPT, asking it to create 5 different unique, short, and engaging social media posts for LinkedIn. I then split out those posts and then add them to a content bank. So rather than just automatically looking for a newsletter and then summarizing it into a quick post and putting it on whatever social media platform, I'm actually going to add it to a bank so we can have a backlog and be able to post them later over the week instead of just once. As I mentioned, I was using an RSS feed from my newsletter. So I'm using Beehive for my newsletter, but I mean, depending on where you're hosting your newsletter or where you want to start one, I think most platforms do offer some sort of RSS feed functionality. But if not, there's a few other ways you could potentially handle that. You could manually trigger. So what you could also do, like the simplest way would be to just go ahead and maybe create a newsletter content. So actually I'm going to create a Google Sheet real quick, just for an example. You can say newsletter content. And so you can just handle this manually. So I have your content column here. And what you do is once you're done with your newsletter, you just copy all the content and paste it into a Google Sheet. And then when you come in here, you can say, okay, on trigger, I want to say sheets on a new row added. So once you paste your newsletter content in, you can go ahead and kick it off from there. Otherwise, another trick that you may want to use is you could actually email yourself the newsletter. I send my email I've signed up to my own newsletter on my own email so that you can actually filter for that email specifically. So you can look for your sending email, and then you can use that as a trigger so that when you get your email, then you could kick off the workflow to then say, okay, let's grab that content and repurpose it. But in this case, I am going to stick with the RSS feed. So RSS feed trigger. We're back to kind of a situation with scheduling. So this could be looking at every minute. In this case, like I only do once a week. So depending on the cadence of your newsletter, you could change this up. But for now, this is actually perfect. So at 2:00 every Friday, my newsletter should have been published by then. So this will go ahead and pull that feed. So I'm going to hop over to Beehive real quick. And over on Beehive in the settings for your account, there is an RSS option. If you didn't already have one, so let's see, I can go ahead and delete this. You would just have RSS feed here. You can just click new RSS feed and it'll generate you a new link to your RSS feed. So all I have to do is copy that and then head back over to n8n. Back in n8n, you would have your feed URL right there. And now it's going to look at that URL. And now that we've set it up to do that every Friday at 2:00, but in this case, we're going to go ahead and fetch just to make sure that it works. And there you go. It got my latest newsletter. This was actually published last Friday, so I'll have a new one going out tomorrow. And it pulls out all of the embedded content or the encoded content. So this is like the full HTML content that goes out when it gets emailed. So it's not the prettiest or most readable, but that's okay. GPT can handle that just fine. But now we have a trigger for the newsletter. So basically, once you've finished your newsletter and then it goes out and published, then the RSS feed will pick that up in this n8n workflow, and then it's got the content and it's able to now create some social media posts. So now that we're able to access the content, let's go ahead and we're going to go straight into OpenAI. We're going to use GPT. In this case, I'm just going to do message a model because it's pretty straightforward. We're just going to pass it in. We don't really need to contextualize it too much or anything fancy like that. You would connect up your OpenAI account if you don't have one already, which is pretty easy. You just go to OpenAI, you would create a new API key, and then you come in here and plug that in, and then you're connected with that. I think it costs $20 a month to be able to do an API key with OpenAI, so not too big of a commitment there. But once you're connected with that, all we're going to do is message a model. In this case, we're just going to use 4.0. I think that will get the job done. So GPT 4.0. Now, what we're going to do is just say, given the newsletter content below, create 5 short, engaging, and valuable social media posts. And I'm going to do for LinkedIn in this case, just because it's easiest, but you could just do generally as well. LinkedIn. I'm also going to say, it loves to do hashtags. I'm going to say, do not use hashtags. I don't know why, but hasn't gotten over that trend. Let's see. And then one other thing I'm going to do is say output your answer in JSON format like this. And then I'm going to give it an example. So I'm going to write a quick JSON object right here. And so we're going to do an array and say post 1 content here, comma, post 2 content here, comma, and then we're going to go ahead and do ... just so we kind of give it an idea of how we want this formatted. And then we are going to put in the newsletter content. So I'm just going to drag content encoded right in here. And so that will go at the bottom of this message to GPT. So I think that looks pretty good. So given the newsletter content below, create 5 short, engaging, and valuable social media posts for LinkedIn. Do not use hashtags. And then output your answer in JSON format like this. So then we kind of give it an idea of like, here's the JSON object that we want. And I think we are good to go. And then below here, this is the, as you can see, all that content. So it's a pretty long message, but that's okay. And again, this is just fine as a user role. We're just saying, hey, here's what we need you to do real quick. Don't need to be very fancy about that. Simplify output, I think, is fine here. And then output content is JSON. Again, if you're using other models, I don't know that everything supports output content as JSON, but the GPT 4.0 and 4.0 mini definitely do. So that will be an option here. But in this case, that's pretty much all we need to do here. It should be able to read this. It should be able to hopefully output the answer in the format that we want. So let's go ahead and try that out. It's a lot of content, so it may take a minute. And there we go. And it looks like it successfully formatted it as we expected. So content is just kind of the general container for its answer. But then we said, hey, can you put the answer in an array like this? And it has done that, which is awesome. So post 1, it's got exciting news there. Post 2, post 3, post 4, and post 5. So that's perfect. Exactly what we wanted. So now that we have content, we've got 5 different posts pulled out of that newsletter. The next thing I want to do is take advantage of what I just did there with explicitly telling it how to output the answer. Because what I'm going to do is split out the answer. So in this case, what we can do with the split out option, and just actually to not brush over that too quickly, let's go over that again. There are a few different other options here. In this case, I'm doing a data transformation node. And so split out is down here at the bottom. So I'm going to split out. And in this case, what we can do is we have an array of these options, and we can just drag content in here. So it'll grab message.content. And then what it's going to do is just break that out into separate fields. So if we do that, cool. We now have 5 items. So it's broken those out into separate answers. So now the last step here, like I mentioned, I was doing a content bank, and I actually will go ahead and recreate that. So this is an example of where we want to be. I'm going to go ahead and create a new one just for demonstration purposes. So in Google Sheets, let's say social media posts from newsletter. Now, I added a few columns in here just to kind of help organize this a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say source title, keeping it kind of generic because you could potentially be pulling in, social media ideas from other sources. And then, so source URL in that case. And then let's say post content. And then I'm going to put a date. So I said created date. And then finally the status. Since we're creating a content bank, I want to be able to keep track of what's been posted and what hasn't. Ideally, you can just directly post straight from GPT. A lot of times it's not the best content. You may want to go back and double check to make sure without just blindly firing it off onto LinkedIn, which is also partly why we're going to be adding this to just a Google Sheet and not having it directly post to LinkedIn. So in that case, we have our columns for how we're going to output the content bank. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and just distinguish these a little bit. So let's do that. Okay. then this will be where we're going to put these outputted answers. So I'm going to go ahead and look for a Google Sheets node, and we're just going to append a row in the sheet. And now let's go ahead and connect up to that Google Sheet that we created. So social media posts from newsletter. This will just be from sheet 1 because we didn't create any other sheets. And it should map our columns automatically. So perfect. That's why I ended up adding in these columns. So let's go ahead and fill those out. So I started with source title. And if we go back, we can see all the inputs from our previous inputs in the workflow. I'm going to go ahead and grab the title from the newsletter, just mostly for reference at this point because we're not actually using it yet. And then I'm also going to grab the URL, again, just for reference. We can go back and look at the newsletter directly if we need to. And then finally, post content. So n8n is actually pretty good about looping sometimes, where it can recognize like, hey, there's multiple items in this object, but it doesn't always handle it the most correctly. So that's why we ended up doing the split out. So in this case, like if it would, you would expect it to be able to iterate through content object here correctly, because it should recognize like, hey, this content object actually has 5 different things in it. And it does seem to recognize that because it looks like the arrow here is available. So you can iterate through, but the fact that it starts with object makes me nervous that it's actually going to do that correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and test this real quick, and I don't think it will work. So let's test setup. Okay, yeah. So what it ended up doing is it posted the entire content list just 5 times. So it figured out that there was 5 different things, but for some reason it didn't actually split them up. So that's not real great. So yeah, all of these are the exact same post every time. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete these real quick. All right, we'll try that again. So that's why I ended up doing this split out node instead, because it doesn't quite recognize that. And that could be also with some prompt magic, we could probably get that to be a little bit more direct. But in this case, message.content, now it understands there's 5 items here, so it will automatically iterate through. And it may actually have been picking up the fact that the split out had 5 items, and then it was just doing this 5 times because there was a 5 items at the top. But anyway, we used split out here just to make sure that we can get through all the individual messages. I am going to also add a date here, and we're going to cheat a little bit and use some JavaScript just so we can keep track of when those rows are added, especially because as ideally, hopefully you have more content ideas coming up than you can possibly get out. So you have a nice backlog and you just want to know, when those were added. So we're just using some quick JavaScript here to say datetime.now. So when this runs, this will automatically pick up whatever the time is when this is actually running. And just fill in that column for us. It's not the prettiest, but at least gets the point across that you've got the date. And then finally, status. I'm going to use ready for review. I mean, I'm just hard coding that in. You can make that whatever you want, but we'll use that status as a way to backlog posts in the bank so that I know that it's not ready yet and it hasn't been published yet. So I just want to go ahead and take a look at it. So at this point, that's pretty much it. So what this should do is go through each one of those 5 items that we generated, and then it should fill in all the rest of these columns correctly. So let's go ahead and test that out. Okay, that looks much better. We have 5 different items, and it looks like the content is actually different. That's not posting the same thing every time. So we'll go ahead and verify here. And there we go. We've got our newsletter title, we've got the URL, and then we have content, and it's actually 5 different pieces of content, which is awesome. And then the date that it ran, they all ran at the same time. So the date should be, I guess it actually does take into account for the iteration. And then all the statuses are ready for review. So in that case, that's pretty much it for this. Just a simple system for turning newsletters into social media content using GPT. You could modify this as much as you want. You could simplify it if you wanted to just automatically summarize the newsletter and then post it on a few different platforms. That would be a much more direct approach. Otherwise, you could then connect this up to another workflow, which I do have a video for, which would actually help you schedule your content database so that it posts things regularly throughout the week rather than just posting it immediately after sending your newsletter. So I do have a few other options there. If you have any other questions or any other ideas, please let me know. I'm going to continue to make tutorials like this on n8n and more automation and AI content. But in the meantime, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.